I'd like to think 6,000 is enough. You're looking at about thirty venues. The difficulty there is identifying which of the venues are going to have the most people at, because clearly, I think just numbers wise, it'd be really difficult to put 500 or 1,000 people protesting, committing vandalism or criminal offences at 30 different locations. So for policing, it's identifying the busier places and then focusing your resources there. So I think what you'll see is a police presence at most of them, but then maybe some reserve capability to then respond within a reasonably short period of time. And I'd imagine some extra resources, some like reserve capability in and around transport hubs, motorways, etc. So they're within maybe 30 minutes to an hour to be able to react to it and respond. But it's up to the officers on scene to give accurate updates on numbers and the threat risk they are facing from the groups at their venues. I'd like to see a bit more proactivity going on. I think there's been far too much standing around, almost waiting to be have things thrown at you. Public order can be quite fast moving and quite dynamic, and you need to be fairly decisive and take decisive actions as a public order commander. And I think when you've got your officers just standing around waiting, the group come closer, come closer, come closer, and then they start throwing things at you. So I think there needs to be maybe it's been a refresher recently, because we haven't seen this level of disorder since 2011. Now that's around 13 years ago. It's 13 years ago. So many of those officers on public order teams now will not have policed serious disorder as they are seeing now. So I think there needs to be a regaining of experience and tactics and knowledge and how to deal with this level of disorder. If you've never done it before, it is quite impactful on you. And you need to be quite fast moving, dynamic, and almost like take the initiative in many occasions, rather than just stand in lines of police officers and let people come up and throw things at you. I think it's a challenge. I'd like to think it's possible, depending on what resources they've got. They've clearly got the numbers to go to all 39, but that means limited numbers at each of the 39. So you're spreading fairly thin there. If you put in like, a couple of police units or one police unit at each venue, and then keeping your capacity, your strength back in reserve at certain locations. So I think there needs to be a police presence at them. But if you start putting 100 cops at each one or 1,000 cops at each one, you're going to run out very quickly. So it's working on being intelligence led, looking at what information you are getting, how people are moving around, the numbers that are gathering at each venue, and then moving your resources accordingly. That's the difficulty in public order policing. It's having that fast moving, that decision making, gathering the intelligence in, and for the operational commander, the silver commander, to then start moving their resources quite quickly and make decisions quickly. But then also be prepared to change your decision when events develop elsewhere. So it can be quite challenging. It's never an exact science. You can't put all your resources to one location and then ignore others. So it is a really challenging situation tonight. We haven't seen it sustained for that period of time. 2011 was I think, just under a week, maybe 4 or 5 days. 85 was similar, but probably less. 81 was a few days of serious disorder that spread across the country, but because there wasn't social media or the internet and 24/7 news, it wasn't picked up by as many people. So we ended up in 81, we had like significant deployments for a number of weeks after the Brixton riots in 81 that I was deployed on. And we sustained that, but most of those days you were on standby, so you weren't actually active out on the street. You're being deployed in a public order role every single day so far, which is clearly more draining. So policing hasn't been tested to this degree and with this level of experience in the public order teams ever, in my experience. So how long they can sustain it for, I think, is a big question. Clearly, you can't have officers working 16-hour days, and not every police officer is public order trained. And we haven't now got the time or the capacity or the capability to train every police officer. So your public order group of officers is fairly small when you compare it with the number of officers in the country, 140,000, I think, and there's a small minority that are public order trained. So you're asking a lot of work, a lot of demand on a smaller number of officers. So how long they can sustain that for is a challenge for the command teams in managing those resources very carefully and monitoring them carefully as well. I think when you take everything in context and the levels of experience in public order policing, the numbers that they've got available, the challenges in the locations they're going to, I think they've done the best they could with the knowledge, experience, training, etc. They've had, the kit they've got available to them. There have been some occasions, I think people saw the footage from Rotherham at the weekend, where you've got a line of officers along a building line. You can never stay still in public order policing, or not for that length of time, and not with that hostile crowd against you. If you're just like on a cordon at a fairly peaceful location, a street junction or something, where there aren't people in front of you throwing things at you, then you can just stand there for a bit. But when you've got a hostile crowd facing you and they are throwing things at you, then just standing still and letting them throw at your shields is not really a tactical option for me. You have to be a bit more dynamic and a bit more proactive, and at least start moving towards them so they back off a bit. Get yourself some distance. Distance is a great savior in public order policing. So, horses, dogs, using the shields a bit more proactively. So moving forward with the shields to almost like go towards the groups, trying to distance them and move them back from you, and then regaining the ground. I'd like to see more of that. There's been far too much static tactics being used over the last couple of days. And I think the public order command team have probably had a bit of a refresh over the last couple of days in shield tactics, more proactive type tactics they can use in these situations. Well, clearly they're stretched, because these officers should be out on the street doing 24/7 policing. They're all, when they're not doing public order, they are driving police cars, response cars, vans, etc., dealing with burglaries, shoplifting, etc. So they're normally dealing with 999 type calls. So there is an element of backfilling going on. There's an element of some of the maybe officers from some non-operational core type roles being drafted from other units, other squads, to backfill some of the response type work. But they're not all going out on the street answering 999 calls. So policing has some capacity, some reserve capacity, and there will be some forces now looking to redeploy officers from maybe some specialist squads or non-operational squads to back up those 24/7 response teams, because policing doesn't stop while the public order officers are out doing these events. Their colleagues back at their stations are still dealing with those 999 calls. They're still coming in. People don't stop ringing the police because this is going on. They're still phoning the police and want an officer to attend and deal with their incident. So there has to be some almost like movement around the officers you have available. As we saw in 2011, there were like detective officers who would normally be investigating specialist type crimes, actually coming out on the street and dealing with some of the 999 calls that within their experience and capability to deal with. Well, it spread in 2011. It spread to a certain degree, as I mentioned, in 1981. Once it hit the news at like 10 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the evening, or people picked the paper up the next day, then they started coming out on the street. So 81 and 85 was the same, but not to the same degree, because there wasn't 24/7 rolling news or the internet in those days. So I think social media has played a significant part in publicising or advertising what's going on, so people can see it, and we're getting events spread across the country much quicker than we have done previously. That's clearly been a challenge for policing to keep up to pace with what's going on. I think it's been a challenge for society and the news media as well, and the whole of society, that actually this is now spreading across the country much quicker than we've seen previously. So I think it's a challenge across the board. Policing is stepping up to meet that challenge by deploying or collecting a number of public order trained or specialist officers together, locating them strategically across the country. So I think it has caught them slightly by surprise, and maybe the plans to have these officers gathered, collected, and strategically located have had to be pushed through quite quickly. But for me, they are meeting that challenge now, albeit a few days after they started.